They built a hotel on my land while I was away. They didn't just take my property. They bulldozed the sacred ground where I buried my wife's ashes. The HOA president just smirked, handed me a trespassing notice for my own home, and said, "You should have answered your mail." They thought they had won. But while they were celebrating their crooked little victory, they had no idea about the one legal time bomb hidden in my wife's old papers, a secret that was about to make me the legal owner of their entire hotel. Where are you watching from? Drop it in the comments below. And if you believe no homeowner should ever be bullied by a power-hungry HOA, hit subscribe, because you're about to watch their entire empire come crashing down. The drive home was supposed to feel good. 6 months away was 6 months too long. I'd gone up north to help my sister after her husband passed, leaving my little slice of lakeside property quiet and empty. The turnoff from the main highway was the same, but something felt off a few miles down the county road. The trees seemed thinner. The road itself felt wider, freshly paved in a way that screamed new money. I slowed the truck, looking for the old split-rail fence that marked the beginning of my 20 acres. It wasn't there. In its place was a crisp, white vinyl fence that looked like it belonged in a gated community, not out here in the woods. I saw the sign first, a big, professionally printed banner tied between 2 posts. The Preserve at Jensen Lake, an exclusive HOA community. Jensen Lake, my grandfather's name for it, the name on my deed. My heart started a low, heavy thud against my ribs. I turned down my long gravel driveway, or what was left of it. It had been widened into a graded service road, wide enough for 2 cement trucks to pass each other, and there were cement trucks. 2 of them, idling near a structure that my mind simply refused to process. Where my small workshop and the tall pines used to stand, a massive 3-story building was framed out, wrapped in Tyvek, windows already being installed. It was a hotel, or a lodge. It had balconies facing the water, and a foundation that stretched nearly to the shore. HOA banners flapped in the breeze from the half-finished roof. Near the road, a fancy sales tent was pitched, with another sign, "Now leasing lakefront luxury rentals." This had to be a mistake, a colossal, impossible mistake. Maybe I'd turned onto the wrong property, but I knew this land like the back of my hand. I knew the slope of the hill, the way the shoreline curved. This was my land. I parked my truck and got out, feeling like I'd stepped into someone else's nightmare. A few guys in hard hats were unloading drywall. I walked over to the nearest one, a man about my age, with a tired face. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Can you tell me what's going on here? This is my property." He glanced at me, then back at the building. "This is the new HOA lodge," he said, not unkindly. "Phase 1 of the community expansion." I shook my head. "No, you don't understand. This is private land. My land. Tom Jensen." He shrugged. "All I know is the HOA lady, Linda. She told our boss the land was abandoned. Said the county took it back or something. We just build where they tell us." Abandoned. The word echoed in the sudden silence of my mind. I hadn't abandoned anything. I'd just gone to bury my brother-in-law. My training kicked in. Facts. Data. I walked away from the crew, my eyes scanning the perimeter. My property markers. They were 4-foot steel posts my grandfather had sunk in concrete 60 years ago. I knew exactly where the northeast corner pin should be. I walked toward the spot, but all I found was churned mud and bulldozer tracks. They hadn't just missed it, they had ripped it out of the ground. They had deliberately erased my boundaries. Panic started to claw at my throat. I turned and looked back at the monstrous building, and that's when the world fell out from under me. The biggest of the pines, the one that stood alone near the water's edge, it was gone. Just a massive raw stump, surrounded by scarred earth. Under that tree, beneath a simple stone marker that I had carved myself, were my wife's ashes, Maggie's ashes. We had picked that spot together. "So I can always watch the sunrise over the lake," she'd said. Now, A concrete foundation sat over her final resting place. The air left my lungs in a silent rush. This wasn't a mistake. This was a desecration. Someone had to have an answer. The construction worker had mentioned a name. Linda. Linda Marks. The HOA president. I knew who she was. She ran the small development next door. A woman with a plastic smile and a clipboard who was notorious for measuring people's lawn height. I drove straight to her house. A perfectly manicured corner lot with more HOA signs than flowers. She opened the door before I even knocked, holding a coffee mug, that realtor's smile already pasted on her face. "Tom, we heard you were coming back. Welcome to the new and improved preserve." My hands were shaking. I clenched them into fists in my pockets. "Linda, there is a hotel being built on my property." She took a slow sip of her coffee, her eyes gleaming with something that looked like pity, but felt like victory. "We tried to reach you, Tom." A number of certified letters were sent regarding the community revitalization project. When you didn't respond to the rezoning notices, the board had to move forward. She spoke in a calm, condescending tone, as if explaining something to a child. "The county recognizes the parcel as abandoned, so the HOA filed a preliminary claim under adverse possession. It's all perfectly legal. You should have answered your mail." The casual cruelty of it stole my breath. It was a well-rehearsed speech. She'd been waiting for this moment. She enjoyed it. I wasn't an engineer anymore. I wasn't a grieving widower. In her eyes, I was just a messy loose end she had neatly tied up. My anger was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but I knew anger wouldn't fix this. I turned without another word and drove to the county records office. The clerk was a young woman who seemed bored until I gave her my parcel number. She pulled the file, a thick manila folder bulging with new paperwork. All of it was filed within the last 4 months. Zoning variances, temporary plat filings, environmental impact waivers, a blizzard of bureaucracy. And then I saw it. The signature on a critical transfer request. It was dated 2 weeks after I'd left town, signed by a county official I'd never heard of. But the signature underneath it, for the petitioner, was Linda Marks. And the notary stamp belonged to a name I recognized. Carol Marks, Linda's cousin. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a land grab. This was a conspiracy, executed with cheap, backroom corruption. But they made one mistake. They assumed I was just some old man who would give up. They didn't know who they were dealing with. I wasn't angry anymore. I was calculating. Leaving the clerk's office, I didn't go to a lawyer. Not yet. I went to a different office and filed the one thing they wouldn't expect. A formal, by-the-book property dispute. I was going to follow the rules, just to see how many more they were willing to break. Let them think they were dealing with a man who trusted the system. The system was theirs. My plan would be my own. Filing the dispute was like poking a hornet's nest with a short stick. I didn't have to wait long for the swarm. The next morning, a sheriff's department SUV rolled down my driveway and parked behind my truck, blocking me in. A deputy, younger than my son, got out and walked toward my front door with that slow, deliberate gate cops use when they expect trouble. I met him on the porch. "Tom Jensen?" he asked, hand resting near his sidearm. I nodded. "There's been a complaint," he said, not looking me in the eye. "From the HOA. Says you're trespassing on community commons property and harassing construction workers." I felt a laugh bubble up, but it died in my throat. It was too absurd. "Deputy," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "My family has owned this land for 60 years. My deed is in a lockbox inside that house. This is my property." He seemed uncomfortable, which was something, I guess. He pulled out a folded paper from his pocket. "Sir, according to this temporary plat filed with the county yesterday, this parcel is designated as Preserve Community Commons, Phase 1, and the active building permit for this address no longer has your name on it." He handed me the paper. It was a cheap photocopy of a county map, with a new dotted line crudely drawn around my land, lumping it in with the existing HOA development. My name, which had been on the original permit filings I saw yesterday, was gone. It was replaced with a corporate-sounding LLC I'd never heard of. My official dispute had triggered their panic button. Linda hadn't just bent the rules, she'd snapped them in half, and was now using the sheriff to beat me with the broken pieces. She and her cousin at the clerk's office had worked overnight to bury my claim under a pile of fresh lies. The deputy saw the look on my face. "Listen, Mr. Jensen, I'm not here to argue deeds. I'm just telling you what the paper says. The HOA president wants you off the premises until this is sorted out in court. If I have to come back, I'll have to cite you." He wasn't threatening me, just stating a fact. The law, in its blind, paper-shuffling majesty, was momentarily on their side. I was a trespasser in my own home. I watched him get back in his car and drive away, leaving me standing on my porch with a worthless piece of paper that declared me a ghost on my own land. The next blow was quieter, but just as vicious. Later that afternoon, an email went out to every resident in the neighboring HOA. A copy was forwarded to me by a number I didn't recognize, with a simple message, "Thought you should see this." The email, signed by Linda Marks, was a masterpiece of corporate poison. It painted me as an absentee landlord who had abandoned his property for years, letting it fall into disrepair. It claimed I had shown up out of the blue to disrupt a community-led revitalization project that would increase property values for everyone. "We are working through the appropriate legal channels to resolve this minor disruption," she wrote, "and we appreciate your patience as we continue to build a better, more prosperous community for all of us." She was turning my neighbors against me, framing me as the selfish outsider, wrecking their investment. The community began to fracture. Some residents, the ones who saw the HOA as a status symbol, bought it hook, line, and sinker. They started driving by my house slowly, staring like I was a zoo animal. But others, the ones who actually knew me, were quiet. They'd wave, but with a hesitation they never had before. Linda had made me a problem to be solved, not a neighbor to be helped. That evening, as dusk was settling, a beat-up work van pulled into my driveway. A man got out, wiping his hands on a rag. It was Rick Dalton, a plumber who lived a few streets over in the HOA. We'd talked a handful of times at the local hardware store. He was a straight shooter. He walked over, keeping his voice low. "Hey Tom, saw the sheriff here this morning. You okay?" I told him the short version. He just shook his head, disgust written all over his face. "That woman," he muttered. "She told everyone at the last meeting you'd moved away for good. Said you sold the land to a developer and this was all part of the deal. The hotel, the whole thing. People were excited about the lake access." His words hit me like a physical blow. She hadn't just lied on paper. She'd stood in front of a room of people and erased my entire life here with a fairy tale. "This ain't right, man," Rick said, looking over at the skeletal frame of the hotel. "A lot of us never believed it. It didn't sound like you." He didn't offer to start a petition or picket Linda's house. It wasn't his style. But in that moment, just having one person stand in my driveway and say, "This ain't right," felt like a crack of light in a very dark room. After Rick left, I couldn't sit still. I needed to walk. I grabbed a flashlight and started walking the old boundary lines, or at least where I remembered them being. I was just moving, trying to burn off the helpless rage. I ended up in the old shed at the back of the property, the only structure they hadn't torn down yet. It was filled with Maggie's gardening tools, and junk we'd meant to sort through for a decade. And in the corner, under a dusty tarp, was an old metal deed box. My heart skipped a beat. We hadn't opened it in years. Inside were the original deeds, old survey maps, and stacks of family papers. And then my fingers brushed against a thick, leather-bound portfolio. I pulled it out. The label on the front read, "Jensen Family Land Trust." My breath caught. 5 years ago, after a health scare, Maggie had insisted we see an estate planner. She was always the forward thinker. "I want to make sure this land stays safe, Tom," she'd said, "no matter what happens." The lawyer had suggested a land trust, a way to protect the property from creditors or legal disputes. It put the land into its own legal entity, with me as the trustee, the manager. It was no longer owned by Tom Jensen, the person. It was owned by the trust. I flipped through the pages. It was all there, properly signed, updated, and notarized. Every single acre. The entire plot they were building on was legally owned by a trust they didn't even know existed. They had filed for adverse possession against me, an individual. They had pulled permits against a parcel owned by me, an individual. But I didn't own the land. The trust did. They had built a hotel on someone else's property entirely. A wave of cold, clean clarity washed over me. All their forged papers, their crooked deals with the county clerk, their public lies, it was all built on a faulty foundation. They had picked a fight with the wrong person because they didn't even know who the right person was. A slow smile spread across my face. My first real smile in days. The fight wasn't over, but the rules had just changed. Linda thought she was playing chess with a pawn. She had no idea she was trying to checkmate a castle. I closed the portfolio, the heavy leather feeling solid and real in my hands. I didn't reach for the phone to call a lawyer. A lawyer would send letters. I needed to establish facts on the ground. I pulled out my old flip phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. "Yeah, Dale," I said. "It's Tom Jensen. I need a surveyor." There was only one man I knew who loved a property line more than he hated bullies. Dale Morrison, who we'd called Digger back in the service because he could find a survey pin buried under 10 years of mud in the dark. I called him. There was no preamble. "Dale, I have a boundary problem." I heard a grunt on the other end of the line. "Where and when?" he asked. "My place. Tonight. After midnight." "They have cameras up," I said. A short pause. "Bring a good thermos of coffee," was all he said before he hung up. Dale arrived at 1 in the morning, his old Ford pickup rattling to a stop a quarter-mile down the road. He got out carrying his transit and tripod like he was carrying a rifle. All business. He was a short, crusty man with a face like a road map and hands that had spent 40 years driving steel into the earth. We didn't waste time with small talk. I laid out the old plat maps from my grandfather's deed box on the hood of his truck, illuminated by a single flashlight. "They ripped out the original markers," I explained. Dale just nodded, his eyes tracing the faded lines on the paper. "They always do," he said. "Amateurs." For the next 4 hours, we worked in near total silence, moving like ghosts in the shadows just beyond the range of the construction site's floodlights. The HOA had installed motion-sensitive cameras on poles around the new building, their little red eyes a constant, sweeping presence. We stayed low, using the trees and the darkness for cover. Dale was a master. Using the old maps and a few known reference points from the county road, he worked his way back, chaining measurements, sinking small wooden stakes that were nearly invisible in the dark. He wasn't looking for the line Linda had invented. He was searching for the one my grandfather had paid for 60 years ago. Around 4 a.m., his metal detector gave a sharp, high-pitched squeal. Dale knelt, dug into the soft dirt just beside the new service road, and his hand came back with a rusted piece of steel, the original southwest corner pin. It had been bulldozed over, buried under 6 inches of fill dirt, but it was there. "Gotcha," Dale muttered. From that one solid point, everything else fell into place. He worked quickly now, and as the first gray light of dawn started to bleed into the sky, the true picture emerged. He ran a bright pink surveyor's ribbon from the rediscovered pin straight to a point near the lake. The line it created was brutally, beautifully clear. It didn't just clip the edge of the new lodge. It sliced right through the middle of it. The main entrance, the lobby, the waterfront balconies, All of it was deep inside my property line. At least 80% of the building sat on land owned by the Jensen Family Land Trust. They didn't just nudge the line, Tom, Dale said, wiping mud from his hands. They drew a whole new fantasy map. This is a forged, secondary parcel line. It has no legal basis. It's the kind of thing you do when you think nobody's ever gonna check the work. He packed up his gear as the first construction trucks rumbled down the road. Before he left, he handed me a set of new wooden stakes. Officially, I was never here. When you're ready, you pound these in. They'll hold up in court. The evidence was rock solid, but I knew a surveyor's map alone wasn't enough. I needed more. Rick stopped by that afternoon with a couple of burgers and a Coke, a quiet gesture of support. While we ate on my porch, he gave me a name, Nina Torres. She was a building inspector for the city, not the county, but she had a reputation for being tough and by the book. She's sick of the HOAs, Rick said. They push her to sign off on stuff she knows ain't right. Linda Marks especially. Rick made a call. An hour later, I met Nina in the parking lot of a grocery store 2 towns over. She was younger than I expected, with tired, intelligent eyes. She was nervous, constantly checking her rearview mirror. I didn't waste her time. I showed her the land trust documents and a picture of Dale's survey line on my phone. I didn't ask her to do anything illegal. I just asked if anything about the project had seemed strange to her. She looked at the documents, her expression hardening. The zoning variance, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Linda pushed through a minor variance for a community shed. That's the paperwork she used to get the initial permit started. There was never a public hearing or a full review for a commercial structure of this size. It's not just a zoning violation, it's outright fraud. They never had the legal right to break ground. She scribbled a file number on a napkin and pushed it across the console. That's the original shed variance application. Compare it to the current building permit. They don't match. They were never supposed to. With that, she put the car in gear. "Good luck, Mr. Jensen," she said, and drove away. I now had 2 smoking guns, a forged property line, and a fraudulent permit. Yet, I did nothing. I let the construction crews keep working. I let Linda keep presiding over her little kingdom, believing she had won. The tension was building. She must have sensed something was off, that my silence was unnatural. A new, more official-looking security guard started patrolling the site. A wannabe cop named Don Avery, who glared at my house every time he drove by. Linda was getting nervous. Then, the letter arrived. It was delivered by a courier, a thick, cream-colored envelope with the HOA's pretentious logo embossed in gold. It was a formal cease and desist order, typed up by a law firm I'd never heard of. It accused me of ongoing harassment and unlawful interference with a legally sanctioned construction project. It threatened immediate legal action, sanctions, and financial penalties if I set foot on the construction site or communicated with any workers again. It was a declaration of war, written on the stationery of a victor. They were telling me to lay down my arms before the battle had even begun. I read the whole thing, every arrogant, threatening word, and for the first time since I'd come home, I felt a genuine, bone-deep smile spread across my face. They had just handed me the stage. Patience is a weapon. While Linda was busy sending threatening letters, I was at the county courthouse, but not to see a judge. I went to a quiet office on the 3rd floor, one that handles trusts and estates. With the notarized land trust documents in my hand, I filed for a confirmation of trustee authority, a simple procedural piece of paper. It didn't argue ownership. It just officially affirmed my legal right to act on behalf of the trust. It took less than 20 minutes and cost me $75. The next morning, armed with that freshly stamped document, a copy of Dale's unofficial survey map, and my original deed, I walked into the city records department. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I simply went to the permits counter and asked to see the active building permit for the Jensen Lake property. A clerk handed it over. I pointed to the name in the property owner box, the LLC that Linda had invented. "That's incorrect," I said calmly. "The legal owner of this property is the Jensen Family Land Trust." The clerk looked confused. I handed him the trust documents and my freshly stamped confirmation of authority. "I am the trustee," I explained, "and on behalf of the trust, I am pulling this permit. The work being done is unauthorized." He blinked, staring at the papers. My documents were legal, official, and most importantly, they were real. The LLC was a fiction. He didn't know the backstory of land grabs or bulldozed gravesites. All he saw was a legitimate trustee exercising his right to control the activity on his property. He called his supervisor over. They spent 10 minutes muttering, looking from my paperwork to their computer screen. Finally, the supervisor nodded. The clerk stamped the permit with a big red "suspended" and handed it back to me. The system I had once mistrusted had just handed me my sword and shield. The silence the next morning was deafening. The usual 7 a.m. roar of generators and the beeping of reversing trucks never came. I watched from my kitchen window as a parade of contractors' pickups arrived, idled for a few minutes, and then turned around. The site foreman was on his phone, pacing and gesturing wildly. I had cut the head off the snake. Without a valid permit, not a single nail could be hammered. If they did, every worker on that site would be uninsured, and the company would face massive fines. Construction had officially, completely stopped. It took Linda less than 2 hours to react. She didn't call me. She went on the offensive. A new email blasted out to the HOA residents. "Urgent community alert," the subject line screamed. She claimed an unstable individual was harassing the city with falsified documents to derail their community's progress. She announced an emergency HOA meeting for that evening at the community clubhouse to set the record straight and present the real facts to the homeowners. Best of all, she announced she would be live streaming the meeting on the community's Facebook page for the sake of full transparency. It was perfect. She wasn't just building a stage for her own downfall. She was selling tickets and setting up the cameras herself. The clubhouse was packed. Linda had set up a table at the front of the room, flanked by her 2 smuggest board members and that little security wannabe, Dawn. A laptop was perched on a stand, its small green light indicating the live stream was active. The air was thick with self-righteous anger. I walked in just as she started talking and stood quietly at the back of the room. A few people turned and stared, whispering. Linda saw me but pretended she didn't, her voice dripping with fake concern as she launched into her speech. "As you know," she began, "we have all been so excited about the Preserve Lodge, a project that will bring so much value and beauty to our community," she went on, spinning her tale of the abandoned property and the selfless HOA stepping in to save it. She called me a disgruntled former owner and waved a sheaf of papers in the air. "We have every legal document, every permit, every zoning approval in order. The claims being made are baseless, and we will not be intimidated." That was my cue. I walked forward from the back of the room, my footsteps echoing in the sudden quiet. I didn't say a word to her. Instead, I walked over to Nina Torres, the city inspector, who I had called that afternoon and asked to attend. She was standing off to the side, looking professional and impartial. I handed her my copy of the suspended permit and the land trust confirmation. "Inspector," I said, my voice calm but loud enough for everyone to hear, "I believe this permit was issued to the wrong property owner." Linda's face went white. "This is a private meeting," she shrieked. "You can't be here." But it was too late. All eyes, and the camera, were on Nina. She took the papers and examined them carefully, her face unreadable. She walked to the podium, ignoring Linda completely. "I can confirm this," Nina said into the microphone, her voice clear and steady. "The building permit for the lodge construction has been suspended by the city. pending a full review of property ownership. The documentation provided by Mr. Jensen as trustee for the Jensen Family Land Trust appears to be valid. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. You could feel the entire mood of the room shift, like a magnetic pole flipping. The smug certainty on the faces of the HOA board members dissolved into confusion. Linda snatched the permit from Nina's hand, staring at the red suspended stamp as if it were written in a foreign language. Her performance had collapsed. The public spectacle she had orchestrated to humiliate me had backfired in the most glorious way possible. This is a temporary clerical error," she stammered, looking at the camera with desperation in her eyes. "Our lawyers will sort this out. This changes nothing." But the power had already shifted. You could see it in the eyes of the homeowners. The seed of doubt had been planted. Her story was falling apart, live, for everyone to see. Sensing her desperation, she played her last card. She pointed a trembling finger at me. "He is costing this community millions. We will sue him for every penny in lost revenue. You will not get away with this." I just stood there. I didn't need to say a thing. I let her threats hang in the air, hollow and weak. I had stopped her bulldozer with a piece of paper. The look of pure, impotent rage on her face was more satisfying than any shout could ever be. I gave a slight nod to the room and walked out, leaving her sputtering in the ruins of her own triumphant press conference. I was calm, because she was threatening to sue me for the revenue from a hotel I was about to own. She just didn't know it yet. The gears of my final move had started turning a week earlier, long before I ever walked into that HOA meeting. Linda's threats to sue me for millions were empty, because I knew a secret she didn't. Her revitalization project was built on a foundation of debt. HOAs don't just have piles of cash lying around for a multi-million-dollar hotel project. They borrow it. I called a friend, an old army buddy, who now worked as a loan officer at a regional credit union. I asked him, hypothetically, how an HOA would finance a big construction project. "They'd go to a private lender, probably," he said. "A smaller, aggressive firm that handles riskier commercial loans. Regular banks would run from that kind of deal." He did some quiet digging. It didn't take him long to find it. The HOA had taken out a massive construction loan from a private lender based out of the city. He gave me the name of the firm. It was a small, 3-partner operation. One of the partners, it turned out, was looking to retire and cash out. Last year, I had sold off a hunting property my father left me up in the mountains. I never used it, and Maggie never liked the idea of it. I had the money sitting in a conservative investment fund, waiting for a rainy day. Well, it was pouring. I contacted the retiring partner through a lawyer, keeping my name completely out of it. My offer was simple. I would buy his entire stake in the lending firm, including his share of the active loans, for cash. For him, it was a clean, quick exit. For me, it was the key. After a week of negotiation, the deal was done. Quietly, legally, and completely under the radar, I had become a partial owner of the company that held the mortgage on the HOA's hotel. I wasn't just the trustee of the land it was built on. I was now their banker. I owned their debt. On paper, that half-built hotel now belonged to me in 2 different ways. Linda had absolutely no idea. She was too busy trying to salvage her reputation. With construction at a dead halt and homeowners asking questions, she decided to double down. She scheduled a grand preview and investor gala at the construction site. It was a desperate, theatrical move designed to project confidence. She sent out glossy invitations to local real estate agents, potential commercial tenants, and even a few local news reporters. She promised champagne, catered hors d'oeuvres, and a first look at the floor plans of the luxury suites. The plan was to create an illusion of success so powerful that it would overwhelm the messy reality of the suspended permit. The event was held under a massive white tent set up right in front of the half-finished building. String lights were hung, little tables with white tablecloths were scattered around, and a string quartet was playing in the corner. It was absurdly fancy for a muddy, idle construction site. Linda was in her element, wearing a bright red power suit, flitting from group to group, with a champagne flute in her hand. Her voice, a high-pitched melody of corporate jargon. I let her enjoy her party for a good 45 minutes. I let her give her big speech about vision and forward momentum and overcoming minor hurdles. I let the reporters take their pictures and the real estate agents sip their free champagne. Then, wearing a clean pair of jeans and my old work jacket, I walked in. I didn't head for the bar or the food. I walked straight to the podium at the front of the tent where Linda stood, beaming for a local blogger's camera. The security guard, Don, moved to intercept me, puffing out his chest. "Sir, this is a private event," he said, trying to sound imposing. I just looked past him, my eyes locked on Linda. The smile vanished from her face. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice low and furious. "Get out!" "In a minute," I said calmly. I placed a single folded document on the podium in front of her. "I believe this is for you." The string quartet faltered and then stopped playing. The entire tent went quiet. Everyone was watching. She stared at the paper, confused. "What is this?" she snapped. "An eviction notice," I said, my voice carrying in the sudden silence. "For the building and for this tent." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Reporters and bloggers immediately raised their phones and cameras. Linda laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "You're insane," she scoffed, picking up the paper to theatrically rip it up. "You have no authority here. This is HOA property." "Actually, no," I said, holding up a second document for everyone to see. "This land belongs to the Jensen Family Land Trust. As the trustee, I'm ordering you to vacate." She turned to the crowd, her face a mask of outrage. "He's a liar. He's a crazy old man with fake papers." That's when I dropped the bomb. I pulled out the third document, the one showing the transfer of the lender's assets to my holding company. I handed it directly to her. "You're right. Suing me would be complicated," I said, my voice even. "Because you see, I am also the lien holder on your construction loan. That means I own the debt for this whole building. So you can try to sue me. But in 30 days, when your first payment is late because you have no construction and no income, I'm going to foreclose on this entire project. My land, my building." The color drained from her face. She looked at the paper in her hand, her eyes darting across the legal language she didn't understand, but the signature at the bottom was clear enough. The confident HOA president vanished, replaced by a cornered, panicked woman. The crowd was silent, watching the public execution. She looked up at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish. She had no words, no spin, no lies left. For the first time, Linda Marks was utterly, completely powerless. In a final, desperate act of defiance, she threw her champagne glass. It wasn't aimed at me. It flew past my head and shattered against the chest of her own HOA vice president, splashing cheap champagne all over his suit. He yelped. The spell was broken. People started whispering, turning to each other, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning realization. The tide hadn't just turned, it was a tsunami. Linda, the queen of her fake empire, had just thrown a wine glass at her own second-in-command in front of the local news. And the show wasn't even over yet. A cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. After the disaster at her party, Linda vanished from public view. The HOA went silent. The construction site was a ghost town, the half-finished building a monument to her spectacular failure. But I knew it wasn't over. She hadn't surrendered. She had retreated to plan one last, desperate attack. I felt it in my gut. Rick felt it too. He came by a couple of days later, looking uneasy. "She's up to something, Tom," he said. "People who try to call her are getting weird, threatening emails back from the HOA account. She's saying she has new evidence that will prove everything." That's when he told me about his hobby. Rick was an amateur wildlife photographer. He had motion-triggered cameras set up in the woods behind our properties, hoping to get a shot of a deer or a fox. "I've got a camera on a tree overlooking your workshop," he mentioned offhandedly. "Figured if she's crazy enough to forge documents, she's crazy enough to trespass. Just in case." I thanked him, but didn't think much of it. It seemed too clumsy, even for Linda. I was wrong. The strike came that night. It was late, just after 2 a.m. I was woken by a faint scraping sound, coming from the direction of my old workshop, the one they hadn't bulldozed yet. It was where I'd stored all my old files, including the deed box with Maggie's original trust documents. I grabbed a heavy maglite from my nightstand and moved to the window. In the pale moonlight, I saw a figure dressed in dark clothing, jimmying open the workshop's side door with a crowbar. They slipped inside, and a moment later, a weak flashlight beam danced across the interior. It was Linda. My blood went from ice cold to boiling in a split second. She wasn't just trespassing, she was breaking and entering, looking for the very documents that had destroyed her. She was trying to steal the evidence. I reached for my phone to call the cops, my thumb hovering over the numbers, but then I stopped. A cop showing up now would just be my word against hers. She'd claim she was retrieving HOA property. It would become another messy legal squabble. Rick's camera. The thought hit me like a lightning bolt. Let her dig her own grave. I stayed by the window and just watched. A few minutes later, she emerged from the workshop carrying 2 dusty cardboard file boxes. She scurried back toward the fence line separating our properties and disappeared into the darkness. The next morning, the HOA's final missile was launched. A new official board memo appeared in every resident's inbox. It was a scanned PDF, rambling and frantic, alleging that the Jensen Family Land Trust was a fraudulent document created after the fact. "We have obtained the original property records," the memo claimed, "which prove Mr. Jensen has falsified his claim to the land. She was using the documents she had stolen from my workshop, twisting whatever was in them to create one last lie." It was a bold, stupid move, the kind you make when you have nothing left to lose. But this time, I had her. I called Rick. "Did your camera get anything last night?" "Let's find out," he said. He came over with his laptop, pulled the memory card from the camera, and plugged it in. A series of short video files popped up on the screen. He clicked the first one, and there she was. Clear as day in the infrared video. Linda Marks, HOA president, prying open my door with a crowbar. The next clip showed her inside, rummaging through my things. The final clip showed her leaving, struggling to carry the heavy boxes. It had captured everything. The timestamp on the bottom of the screen read 2:14 a.m. This time, when I called the sheriff's department, my voice was different. There was no uncertainty. "I need to report a breaking and entering that occurred last night," I said, "and I have video of the suspect." The same young deputy who had served me the trespassing notice showed up half an hour later. He looked skeptical, especially when I told him the suspect was the HOA president. I didn't argue. I just invited him in, opened Rick's laptop, and played the video. His face went rigid. He watched it once, then asked me to play it again. The professionalism snapped into place. "Sir, can you email me these files?" he asked, already pulling out his official notepad. "Please don't touch anything in the workshop." The show was about to begin. I forwarded him the videos, and then I waited. Public spectacle number 3 was unplanned but perfectly poetic. The arrest didn't happen in the dead of night. It happened at 4 p.m., when kids were getting off the school bus and people were coming home from work. 2 sheriff's cruisers rolled slowly down Linda's street and parked directly in front of her meticulously landscaped house. The deputy, now joined by a senior officer, walked up her pristine flagstone path and knocked on the door. Several neighbors came out onto their porches, sensing the drama. Linda opened the door, dressed in her usual business casual attire, a look of annoyance on her face. Then she saw the uniforms. We could hear her raised voice from down the street, indignant and shrill. But there was no arguing with the silent, grainy video evidence. A few minutes later, they led her out in handcuffs. The woman who had built an empire on rules, regulations, and appearances was being put into the back of a police car in front of her entire kingdom. Her face was a ruin of disbelief and humiliation. The video, I later learned, went viral on the local news blog before the 6 o'clock broadcast. The petty tyrant had been dethroned, not in a boardroom, but in her own driveway. The HOA board imploded. The vice president, the one who took the champagne to the chest, resigned the next day. The rest of the board members went into hiding. Their phone lines suddenly disconnected. Within a week, a grassroots movement, led by Rick and a few other long-suffering homeowners, had collected enough signatures to call for a vote to dissolve the current board entirely. At an emergency meeting packed with angry residents, Linda Marks was officially removed as president in absentia. The house of cards had fallen. A few days after the arrest, I called a gathering. Not a formal meeting, but an informal get-together on my property, right in the shadow of the silent, half-built lodge. Neighbors came, tentative at first, then with a growing sense of relief. I walked them through what I had planned. The lodge wasn't going to be torn down. I told them it would be repurposed. The ground floor would become a community workshop and a vocational training center for veterans transitioning back to civilian life. The upper floors would be converted into affordable, temporary housing for their families. There was a stunned silence. Then someone started clapping. The applause spread, rolling across the property, genuine and loud. It was the sound of a community taking its first breath of fresh air after being suffocated for years. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, I walked over to the front door of the unfinished building. It was chained and padlocked. I had a new, heavy-duty lock in my hand. I cut the chain, removed their lock, and snapped mine into place. I held the single key in my palm, its cold metal, a solid, comforting weight. It was my land, and now it was my building. A quiet smile touched my lips. The war was over. Now it was time to build something that mattered. The fallout was swift and decisive. Faced with a felony breaking and entering charge and the undeniable video evidence, Linda's fight was over. She took a plea deal. She got probation, community service, and was ordered to pay restitution for the damage to my workshop and the legal fees I had incurred. The judge also issued a permanent restraining order, barring her from setting foot within 500 yards of my property. It was a quiet, clinical end to her reign of terror. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown, just a signature on a piece of paper that stripped her of her last remaining shred of power. Her cousin, the county clerk, quietly resigned a week later, citing health reasons, and a state-level investigation into the county records office was launched. The entire rotten foundation of her little empire crumbled into dust. With Linda gone, the fight went out of the old HOA board. Every bogus fine, every threatening letter, and every lien they had filed against residents over the years was systematically challenged and rescinded by the new, homeowner-led board. It was like a dam had broken. People who had been afraid to speak up for years were now demanding accountability. The story of our little neighborhood drama even made it to the town council. Alarmed by the flagrant abuse of power, the council passed a new ordinance, closing the voluntary annex loophole Linda had used to try and absorb my land. Never again could an HOA in our town expand its jurisdiction without the explicit, notarized consent of the landowner. It wasn't just a victory for me. It was a firewall for every property owner in the county. My final legal step was the most satisfying. I walked into the county records office not with a complaint, but with a stack of court-certified documents. I filed a quiet title action, which is a formal, legal way of erasing any doubt about who owns a piece of land, with the land trust paperwork, Dale's official survey, and the evidence from Linda's criminal case. It was an open and shut case. The court issued a judgment that permanently extinguished all of the HOA's false claims. I watched as the clerk stamped the new deed, officially recording the Jensen Family Land Trust as the sole, undisputed owner, and then physically expunged every fraudulent filing Linda and her cousin had made. My property was clean again. It was mine, unequivocally. My land. My rules. But my work wasn't done. The physical scars on the land remained. The first thing I did was hire a landscaping crew to clear the debris where the big pine had stood. They ground down the stump until nothing was left, then brought in fresh topsoil, grading the earth until it was smooth again. I went to a local nursery and bought a new tree, a young white pine barely taller than I was. With my own hands, I dug the hole in the exact spot where the old one had been. It felt right. As I filled the earth back in around the roots, it felt less like planting a tree and more like making a promise. The next day, I installed a small, simple bronze plaque at its base. It didn't have a long, flowery epitaph. It just had 3 words etched into it: Maggie's View, always home. The transformation of the lodge began slowly. Then all at once, Dale Morrison came back, this time in broad daylight, volunteering to supervise the structural work. Rick organized a community work weekend, and dozens of neighbors showed up with tool belts, paint rollers, and coffee. Veterans from the local Legion Hall, hearing about the project, arrived in force. These were men like me, engineers, electricians, plumbers, carpenters, who knew how to build things with their hands. There was a quiet competence to the work, a shared sense of purpose that you don't find on a normal construction site. Laughter echoed through the unfinished hallways. The building, which had started as a monument to greed, was being reborn as a symbol of solidarity. One afternoon, I was up on a ladder, helping a couple of younger vets fix a section of the roof. The sun was warm on my back, and the lake glittered below. I looked down and saw a group of neighbors setting up a picnic table, unloading sandwiches and iced tea. Rick was showing a young airman how to properly sweat a copper pipe. And Nina, the inspector, was there too, not with her clipboard, but with a tray of cookies, pointing out a code-compliant way to run some wiring. The sounds weren't of machinery and commerce, but of hammers, saws, and easy conversation. For the first time in a long time, the land felt like home again. It was Maggie's View, and now it was a place of healing. They tried to take my land, so I took back everything they built on it, and then I gave it to the people who had actually earned it.